sick of the complaints because it was really obvious to me she was doing nothing but her best to be compliant.
Hope. Not we are. Not we've healed. I hope. Because hope, in this context, isn't resolution. It's uncertainty. And uncertainty is where control still lives. This was supposed to be an apology. That's how Cody framed it. That's how he sold it to himself and to the audience. A man showing up. A man doing the right thing. A man offering closure. But here's the first uncomfortable truth. Christine didn't ask for an apology. David didn't ask for an apology. And most importantly, the people who actually needed accountability weren't even the focus of the conversation. From the moment Cody sat down, the energy was off. Not tense in an explosive way, but awkward, misaligned. Like everyone in the room was participating in a different conversation, whether they wanted to or not. Christine's body language told the real story. Calm, neutral, disengaged, not defensive, not emotional. Done. This wasn't a woman waiting to be set free. This was a woman who had already walked away, rebuilt her life, and found peace long before this moment ever happened. Cody, however, hadn't caught up to that reality. He came prepared to apologize for a relationship that no longer existed, to wounds that had already healed without him. And that alone revealed the core problem. This wasn't about Christine's healing. It was about Cody needing to feel like the one who granted it. Christine didn't need closure. She didn't need validation. She didn't need permission. And when someone insists on apologizing after being told it's unnecessary, you have to ask why. Because real apologies respect boundaries. Performative ones ignore them. David noticed this immediately. Unlike Cody, David wasn't there to relive the past. He wasn't interested in rehashing a failed marriage or revisiting emotional ground that had already settled. His focus was clear, steady, and forward-looking. The kids. That's where the tension really started. David gently pointed out something that cut through the entire performance. Apologizing to women who had already moved on wasn't the priority. The real issue, the unresolved one, was the damaged relationship between Cody and his children. That single redirection shifted the entire room. Because the moment accountability moved away from Christine and toward the kids, Cody shut down. Not slowly, not subtly, immediately. His posture changed, his tone hardened, his words became more defensive. It was as if the conversation had crossed into forbidden territory. Cody made it very clear. He was there to apologize to Christine. Not to David, not to the kids, just Christine. And that statement alone spoke volumes. Because if this were truly about making things right, the children would have been the center of the conversation. But they weren't. They were treated like a distraction, an inconvenience, a topic to be avoided. Instead, Cody began reminiscing. He talked about how beautiful the relationship once was, how magical it had been, how deeply he wanted Christine to heal. There was just one problem she already had, and he wasn't part of that process. Christine had done the work privately, quietly, without him. And nothing unsettles a controlling narrative more than realizing you're no longer needed to complete it. At no point did Cody clearly acknowledge specific harm. There was no direct ownership of his actions, no recognition of patterns, no responsibility. The closest he came was a vague admission that he played the victim, followed by a blunt statement that he didn't love her. And then, nothing. No repair. No reflection. No accountability. Christine's reaction said everything. Or rather, her lack of reaction did. She wasn't moved. She wasn't shaken. She wasn't impressed. Because apologies that center the speaker instead of the impact rarely land. David, watching this unfold, wasn't confrontational. He didn't challenge Cody's ego. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't assert dominance. He stayed calm, measured, focused. And that calm became a mirror Cody didn't want to look into. David spoke about respect, about responsibility, about the importance of repairing relationships with the kids. Not for appearances, not for television, but because children carry wounds longer than adults do. That's when Cody became visibly uncomfortable. Because David wasn't impressed by the performance. He wasn't moved by the speech. And he wasn't buying the narrative. And perhaps most threatening of all, David wasn't afraid of Cody. This wasn't about two men clashing egos. It was about two completely different approaches to adulthood. One man was concerned with how he looked. The other was concerned with who was still hurting, and that difference couldn't be ignored. The irony was painful. David cared more about Cody's relationship with his own children than Cody seemed to. And that reality hit harder than any insult ever could. From that moment on, the conversation was no longer about an apology. It was about exposure. Cody insisted his purpose was pure, that he was simply there to do the right thing. But his actions betrayed him. Every time the conversation drifted toward accountability, toward consequences, toward the kids, he redirected it back to himself, back to Christine, back to the past, back to his feelings. Because as long as the focus stayed there, he could remain the center of the story. But stories lose power when the audience stops listening, and Christine had already stopped. David could see it. The audience could see it. Even Cody, on some level, could feel it slipping, and that's when control became the priority. Because when someone realizes they're no longer needed to close the chapter, they often try to rewrite the ending. This was never about healing, it was about Cody needing to believe he still mattered in a story that had already moved on without him. And that realization set the stage for everything that came next. Once the conversation shifted away from Christine and toward the kids, everything changed. This is where Cody stopped pretending. Up until that point, he could still perform the role he came prepared to play. The apologetic ex, the reflective man. The one who showed up. As long as the focus stayed on Christine, the narrative remained safe, familiar, controlled. But the moment David redirected the conversation to the children, Cody's emotional temperature spiked. Because the kids represent consequences. They are living proof that words weren't enough. That apologies weren't made. That damage lingered long after the marriages ended. And unlike Christine, the kids hadn't moved on. They were still waiting for consistency, still waiting for effort, still waiting for accountability. That reality was unbearable for Cody. Instead of engaging, he shut the conversation down. Flatly, firmly. He made it clear that discussing the children would push him back into anger. That sentence alone said more than anything else he'd spoken. A father admitting that talking about his children's pain makes him angry isn't a boundary. It's an avoidance tactic. Boundaries protect emotional safety. Avoidance protects ego. Cody framed his refusal as self-control, as growth, as someone choosing peace. But what he was really doing was dictating the terms of the conversation, so he wouldn't have to sit with discomfort. And that's where the hypocrisy became impossible to ignore. Cody demanded respect for his boundaries while ignoring everyone else's. Christine had already said she didn't need an apology. David had reinforced that point. The room was clear, but Cody continued anyway, because his boundary wasn't about respecting others. It was about controlling the moment. He repeated again and again that he didn't care what anyone else thought. He said it like a mantra, as if repetition could turn indifference into justification. I don't care what people think. But that wasn't strength. That was defensiveness. People who genuinely don't care don't need to announce it. What Cody wanted wasn't conversation. It was acknowledgement, validation, agreement. He wanted to speak uninterrupted, to be seen as the one doing the right thing, regardless of whether it actually helped anyone else. The second someone tried to steer the conversation toward meaning, he shut it down, and that's when the illusion of accountability completely collapsed. Christine wasn't emotional. She wasn't reactive. She wasn't defensive. She was finished. Her calm wasn't weakness. It was clarity. She had already grieved that relationship, already processed the loss, already let go of the version of Cody who might have shown up differently. She wasn't there to revisit old wounds so he could feel absolved. David saw this, too, and instead of escalating, he protected the boundary Christine was setting. He didn't interrupt. He didn't confront. He simply redirected, again and again, gently pulling the focus back to what mattered. The kids. That's what made Cody unravel, because as long as the conversation centered on Christine, Cody could maintain the illusion that he was offering something valuable. But when the conversation shifted to the children, it exposed how little he had actually done. He didn't want to hear feedback. He didn't want perspective. He certainly didn't want criticism. He wanted agreement. And when he didn't get it, his frustration surfaced. His tone sharpened. His patience evaporated. The mask slipped. The calmer David became, the more agitated Cody grew. It wasn't because David was disrespectful. It was because David wasn't impressed. That's a dangerous position for someone who relies on dominance and narrative control, because indifference can feel more threatening than confrontation. By this point, it was obvious the apology wasn't about repair. It was about Cody wanting to leave the conversation feeling justified. He needed to believe he had done his part, even if no one else agreed. As long as the focus stayed on Christine, he could tell himself the story he wanted to believe. That he showed up, that he tried, that he offered closure. But the moment the kids entered the conversation, that story fell apart. So he avoided it, repeatedly. And then, when avoidance wasn't enough, he reached for a familiar shield. Polygamy. Suddenly, the breakdown of his relationships wasn't about choices he made. It was about the system, the environment, the lifestyle. According to Cody, no one person was responsible. It just happened. That wasn't reflection. That was deflection. By blaming the structure, he removed himself from accountability entirely. The pain with his kids wasn't the result of neglect or absence or emotional withdrawal. It was simply a byproduct of the situation. That framing was convenient and deeply dishonest, because polygamy didn't force him to disengage. It didn't prevent him from showing up. It didn't stop him from taking responsibility. Those were choices. And when David challenged that narrative, Cody dismissed him. Because in Cody's mind, David didn't understand polygamy. That dismissal mattered. David wasn't speaking from ignorance. He had grown up around polygamy. He had seen the damage, the fallout, the generational trauma. His perspective wasn't theoretical, it was lived. But the moment David stopped reinforcing Cody's narrative, his voice was invalidated. "You're on the other side." What Cody really meant was, you don't support the system, so you don't get to criticize harm within it. But that logic collapsed instantly, because the issue wasn't polygamy existing. It was how Cody behaved inside it. Cody chose this life. Cody chose to bring multiple women into it. Cody chose to father more children than he could emotionally support. Those decisions belonged to him, and no amount of reframing could erase their impact. When Cody claimed that neither he nor his children had done anything wrong, the moment turned chilling. No remorse, no reflection. No acknowledgement, just a flat refusal to accept responsibility. Christine, the mother of 6 of his children, sat there while he declared himself blameless. That wasn't misunderstanding. That was entitlement, and it made something painfully clear. Cody didn't come to apologize. He came to control the narrative one last time, and the harder he tried, the more obvious it became. At this point in the conversation, Cody reached for something he's used many times before when he feels cornered. Therapy language. Words like boundaries, triangulation, and accountability suddenly appeared in his vocabulary, not as tools for understanding, but as weapons to shut the conversation down. The most glaring example was his accusation of triangulation. Cody claimed that Christine was interfering in his relationship with his children, positioning her as the problem once again. The word itself sounded confident, almost clinical, as if naming it automatically made him right. But the accusation didn't hold up. Triangulation isn't a parent listening to their child. It isn't a mother offering comfort when her kids are hurting. And it certainly isn't helping facilitate communication when a relationship has already been damaged. Real triangulation happens when an adult pulls a child into adult conflict. When they force a child to carry messages, pick sides, or absorb emotional burdens that aren't theirs to hold. Ironically, that's exactly what Cody has been doing for years. By accusing Christine, he was attempting to erase her role entirely. To silence her. To tell her she had no right to speak to her own children about their relationship with their father. And by framing it as triangulation, he created a convenient excuse to avoid doing anything at all, while also blocking anyone else from stepping in to help. The logic was upside down. Cody demanded that his kids reach out to him directly and apologize before any reconciliation could happen. At the same time, he refused to take the first step himself. And now, by accusing Christine of interference, he was cutting off the one path that might have led to healing. Distance, but only on his terms. The hypocrisy was staggering. Cody had no problem placing Robyn in the middle of every relationship. He had no issue pitting family members against each other. He had spent years drawing lines, testing loyalty, and demanding alignment. Yet suddenly, when Christine offered support to her children, that was the problem. That was the line he claimed had been crossed. Then came the moment that revealed just how deeply Cody still believed he held power over Christine. The comment about setting her free. In front of her husband, Cody spoke as though Christine was still somehow tied to him, as if she needed his permission to fully live her life. The implication was insulting. It suggested she was still emotionally stuck, still carrying unresolved pain, still waiting for closure only he could provide. Christine shut that down immediately, calmly, clearly, without hesitation. She made it clear that her healing had already happened, that it was her responsibility, that any closure she needed had come long before she committed to her marriage. The idea that Cody was now stepping in to release her from something she had already left behind wasn't humility. It was ego, and it exposed something uncomfortable. Cody wasn't struggling to let go of Christine's pain. He was struggling to let go of Christine. His words didn't sound like concern. They sounded like ownership, and when you look at the conversation through that lens, his hostility toward David makes sense. David wasn't just another man. He was proof. Proof that Christine had moved on. Proof that she was thriving. Proof that she didn't need Cody to be okay. That's why the disrespect toward their marriage kept surfacing. Subtle jabs, comparisons, references to time spent together, as if history equaled entitlement. Each comment crossed a line, and each time, Christine and David responded the same way. They didn't escalate. They didn't argue. They didn't engage. They held their boundary. That refusal to play along was deeply unsettling for Cody, because without engagement, without conflict, without emotional reaction, his control evaporated. So he doubled down. He rewrote definitions. He reframed events. He positioned himself as the victim. Anyone who challenged him became hostile. Anyone who disagreed became ignorant. Anyone who refused to validate him became the enemy. But the harder he tried to assert dominance, the clearer it became. This wasn't about boundaries. It was about power. David never raised his voice. He never insulted Cody. He never attacked. He simply spoke with clarity and concern, and that was enough to provoke rage. Because accountability feels like an attack to someone who believes they should never be wrong. By hiding behind polygamy, therapy language, and self-pity, Cody revealed the truth. He wasn't confused. He wasn't misunderstood. He was avoiding blame, at all costs. And as the conversation dragged on, it became painfully clear that it was no longer productive. The gap between what Cody wanted and what Christine and David were willing to tolerate grew wider by the minute, which set the stage for how this encounter would finally end. By the time the conversation reached its final stretch, the emotional exhaustion was unmistakable. Christine and David weren't angry. They weren't defensive. They were done. David made one last attempt to soften the moment. Not to win. Not to dominate. But to move forward. He offered a neutral gesture, something that suggested coexistence was still possible. A simple acknowledgement that not every conversation has to end in conflict. Cody couldn't meet him there. He rejected compromise, just as quickly as he rejected accountability. What stood out most in those final moments was Cody's inability to read the room. Christine had said, multiple times in calm and respectful ways, that she didn't need this apology. David echoed it. The message couldn't have been clearer. Yet Cody kept talking. He pressed on as if repetition alone could force acceptance. As if saying the words enough times would make them land. There was no awareness that the people sitting across from him had already emotionally checked out. They weren't hurt. They weren't angry. They were finished. And that's when Christine made her choice. She didn't explode. She didn't argue. She didn't defend herself. She disengaged. She acknowledged that Cody still had more to say, but she was done listening. That quiet decision carried more power than any confrontation could have. It was a boundary set without hostility, a refusal to participate in something that no longer served her. David followed her lead. No drama. No insults. No escalation. They stood up together, chose peace, and walked away. That moment mattered, because for the first time, Cody didn't get to control how it ended. He looked stunned. It was clear he expected to dictate the conclusion, just as he tried to control the conversation from the beginning. He expected validation, agreement, recognition for showing up. Instead, he was left mid-monologue, and that silence said everything. Christine didn't need his apology. She didn't need his approval. She didn't need his permission. She was already free. Free without his blessing. Free without closure on his terms. Free without rewriting her story to accommodate his ego. And that's the part Cody couldn't handle. This episode made one thing undeniable. Christine wasn't bitter. She wasn't broken. She wasn't stuck in the past. She had moved on, built a new life, and found happiness that didn't revolve around managing someone else's emotions. David didn't threaten Cody because he was aggressive or confrontational. He threatened Cody because he represented something Cody no longer had. Peace. The contrast between them was stark. One man clung to control, narrative, and validation. The other focused on respect, boundaries, and the well-being of children. And viewers saw it. Not in raised voices, not in dramatic exits, but in calm refusal. That's why this moment resonated so deeply. Because it exposed a truth many people recognize from their own lives. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do isn't to argue. It's to stop participating, to walk away without asking for permission, to choose yourself without waiting for someone else to understand. Cody's apology was never an apology. It was a performance. And David saw right through it. Christine did too. Now I want to hear from you. What did you take away from this interaction? Did Cody's behavior surprise you, or did it confirm what you've been seeing all along? Share your thoughts in the comments. If you found this breakdown helpful, give the video a thumbs up, subscribe to The Truth and TLC, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next deep dive. Because this conversation isn't over.